The Senate Judiciary Committee is hearing comments today on the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. This bill was created in response to a wave of restrictive voting legislation passed by several states this year. It aims to fully restore the Voting Rights Act of 1965 by bringing back protections lost as a result of two Supreme Court decisions. Those provisions allow voters to sue to block discriminatory voting laws and the pre-clearance formula. The House passed its version of the bill in August, but Democrats have had trouble pushing legislation through the closely divided Senate. With more on this, I'd like to bring in CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist Antjuan Seawright. Antjuan, welcome. So a version of the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act was introduced to the Senate just yesterday, and today the Senate Judiciary Committee is already holding a hearing. What does that tell us?
It tells us that all hell is breaking loose all across this country when it comes to restricting and further suffocating the right to vote for so many people around this country, in particular those who look like me and those who showed up in election after election in record numbers to give Democrats victories up and down the ballot. And so there's this fierce urgency of now. Voting rights, Tanya, for some of us, it's almost like oxygen. It's basic infrastructure, because without free and fair access to the ballot box, we do not have anything else. And that's why I oftentimes refer to voting rights as the most consequential legislative issue of our day. And so around the country, you've seen bills introduced. You've seen a Supreme Court decision in 2013, which in my view was a straight gut punch in the belly of our ancestors who fought so hard. Many of them were killed for our right to vote, and here we are going full steam backward in this country, all because the browning of America is happening and because the net worth and the network of African American voters all across this country continues to expand.
And Antjuan, are there major differences from the House version of this bill? And, how is it different from the Freedom to Vote Act introduced by senators last month?
Well, I think you see several versions of voting protection being introduced and passed both in the House and the Senate, because they're trying to get to a place where something will pass, because the cost of being comfortable in this regard is just too expensive for generations of people. And so there are basic ingredients that are inclusive in almost all of the bills when it comes to, one, pushing back on some of the local state legislation that has passed, but two, making certain that things like Election Day is a holiday, making sure that people are not penalized for handing someone a bottle of water or food in line, making sure that counties and cities and municipalities and even states cannot do some of the things we've seen introduced and passed in some of these states when it comes to a legislative front. So there's some basic infrastructure ingredients in all the bills. I think where some of the disagreements may come is some of the bigger things that maybe do not fit so much around what the Supreme Court did in Shelby versus Holder in 2013.
And why has it been so difficult for Democrats to push this legislation through the Senate? Where is the major, pushback coming from, and how can legislators move through that?
Well, it's the argument of the loaf. There are some people who want the whole loaf in my party, and there are some who are okay with doing 3/4 of a loaf, some with half. But at the end of the day, I think we have to make certain we do. And talking to Congressman G.K. Butterfield just a few days ago, he emphasized the importance of making sure that we really do everything we can to push back on what the Supreme Court did in 2013. Thankfully, those who may have not been on board with some of the legislation being passed in the House have introduced legislation in the Senate that will also cover some other gaps and deal with some other concerns when it comes to voting rights and expanding voting rights in this country, like same-day registration in some places, like making early voting a priority, like having universal mail-in ballots, like making Election Day a holiday, and some of those things that basically Democrats and Republicans agree upon based on some of the polling I've seen above 50%.
Antjuan Seawright, thank you so much for joining us. As always, a pleasure to have you with us.